live. We're so happy that you're here to join us today. This event is brought to you by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration's Bringing Recovery Supports to Scale Technical Assistance Center strategy, otherwise known as Brass Tacks. My name is Valerie Gold, and I am a Deputy Director for the Brass Tacks project. Our TA Center is dedicated to increasing access to recovery supports, and we achieve this work through a variety of mechanisms, including a lot of TA focused on systems transformation and developing the capacity of peer-run recovery community and family and youth-led organizations. Today, we will be talking about strategic sharing and recovery messaging. We are very fortunate to have three amazing presenters with us. I'm going to ask each of them to wave as I say their names. You'll be hearing a lot more from each of them very soon, but we just have a little bit of other stuff to cover first. So just briefly, let me introduce the wonderful Lacey Kendrick Burke, Juan Velez Court, and Justin Luke Riley. So as you were coming into the room today, most of you seem to have noticed already, we posted a poll question for you all to answer to give us a sense of who we have joining us on today's event. So thank you for taking the time to enter some information. It looks like we have a really great group of people, including a large number of folks who identify as being individuals in recovery. We also have a lot of family members, providers, certified peer specialists and recovery coaches, and a sprinkling of students. And thanks to some great initiative in the chat, we also have a sense of where people are coming from for this event, and it looks like a really great geographic mix. So welcome, 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 everybody. The style of today's event is going to include a lot of participation from you. You'll see a few additional polls coming up today, and we hope that you will participate. This helps us to better understand who's listening in, and when we have the polls where you get to type in a little bit more information, we get to get a sense of some of your thoughts around the issues we're talking about as well. We also hope that you will freely share your questions and comments at any time during this event. You can type your questions or comments into the chat box titled Post Your Comments and Questions Here. It may take us a bit of time to get to each question, but we will do our best to answer all of them. And now I'd like to bring another poll question up on screen and ask you to weigh in on this one. Think about the recovery stories that you have heard from others. What have they taught you? As you start to think about that question and share your responses with us, I'll cover a few housekeeping items related to today's event. Today's session, which is being recorded, will last for about 1 hour. If, as you're listening to the content, you feel inspired to reach out for technical assistance around this or any other topic, please go ahead and download the Brass Tacks TA request form from the Files for Download pod. During this event, you will be in listen-only mode. We encourage you to submit your questions at any point, though, using the chat box. We need to keep people in listen-only mode just because with the amount of people that we have on the call, it would be difficult to have people asking their questions out loud. Please make sure that you're listening in using your computer as opposed to a phone line, but if you find that you're experiencing some difficulties listening in that way, there is a phone number available in the audio instructions pod, which is located in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. When we close this room out at the end of the event, a satisfaction survey will automatically open in your internet browser. We'll be very, very grateful if you will take just a couple of minutes to complete the survey, since the survey answers help us to better serve you. And it's very fast, we promise. A link to the survey is in the web links pod below, where you will also see the links to the Brass Tacks website. And with that, I am very happy to turn this over to Lacey.
Awesome. Thanks, Valerie. Excited to be here today to get to talk about recovery. This is one of the most awesome experiences that I have had in life, is to get to see that what is recovery, what's possible. So I'm really excited to be here. As she said, my name is Lacey Kendrick Burke. I'm a team member with Change Matrix, and we are a subcontractor on the Brass Tacks contract from SAMHSA, which just means that we get to be part of this awesome team that works together to promote and expand recovery supports across the United States. Really excited to be a part of that team. And some of my lived experience that I bring to the table, which I'll share throughout the presentation, I was in the foster care system. I went in at 15 with 5 of my siblings and aged out of the foster care system, and then was adopted as an adult at age 28. So I have various experiences there, various perspectives, and I'm a person with mental health conditions that I still receive treatment for, as well as a person in recovery. So get to talk a lot more about all of that. And the Wonder Woman costume, you'll see, no, it wasn't Halloween. This was one of the best youth conferences I've gotten to do. I ran around as Wonder Woman for 3 days dressed like that, and it was a superhero-themed youth conference. So just a little bit about some of the work that I do. All right, so let's get into the meat of the presentation today. Recovery, what does that even mean? What I want to talk about today is sharing just a little bit about my recovery journey and also how that really allows, being allowed to discover what a recovery journey means for each person, I think has significance, and being able to define what recovery means for you. There's no one-size-fits-all recovery, and recovery looks very different across different people, different cultures, as well as different experiences. So my experience primarily started in the foster care system. I am a person with several family members many of whom have not found recovery. And so that leads to, a lot of different life experiences. I personally experienced abuse and neglect, and so that's what led us to go to the foster care system. Obviously, some mental health challenges as a result of that. I have PTSD that I still manage, and also depression. Who knows if that's from life or from family experience, but so those are a couple of the things that I have dealt with over my journey and continue to deal with today. So as I said, we went into the foster care system, and we were split up from siblings in 2 and 2, and all of us ended up aging out of the foster care system at some point or another. And so we, through that process, we did not receive a lot of mental health services. There were some available, but what was available wasn't necessarily effective for us specifically. And so I really struggled with that as I was aging out and developing into an adult. And I was, really, really fortunate. I got a job as a national youth consultant at the age of 22. And we got to travel around the U.S., help youth advisory boards, help other young people that were aging out of foster care learn how to share their voice and advocate. And I, had a good relationship with my adopted family and all of these amazing things. And at the same time, I had gotten down to the path of suicidal ideation and just so overwhelmed with all of these negative feelings, I didn't even want to be here anymore. And so I didn't necessarily want to go that way, but I also didn't know that there was any other options available. So for me, at that point in my life, recovery wasn't in my vocabulary. I had never heard of it. I didn't know what it was. And so through my work doing youth advocacy and youth movement, I was able to get connected to this whole other youth movement in the mental health field. And through that process, I met so many peers who knew that they had recovery, they had treatment options, they had other options available. And so I was able to learn from them sort of what recovery could look like, but not necessarily in that language. And so I knew that there was other ways to deal with the negative stuff that I was feeling. And so that recovery is what that meant to me at that time. So I was able to find treatment, effective treatment for mental health challenges, and a lot of that was through my peer relationships and being able to connect with them and hear from peers who had similar experiences, but they were able to find ways to be okay with it and ways to live within that recovery. And so that's sort of what took me through the next several years of my journey with the mental health recovery is being able to join a national youth movement. I became the executive director of Youth Move National, which is where I made a lot of really great connections, great friends, and found that I loved advocacy as part of my recovery, and at the same time learning that advocacy couldn't be 100% of my recovery. I had to find other ways for self-care that was outside of the movement for me to be able to sustain my own recovery journey. I also didn't have a lot of language, though, for mental health recovery at that time, and it was through through the process of getting to meet the wonderful JLR, who's here with us on the webinar, that I first ever got to talk about what does recovery look like? What is substance use recovery? What is mental health recovery? What does recovery mean to me? And he was very cool and patient with a group of us sitting there at dinner just walking through, does it mean that I'm not using alcohol? Does it mean that I am working out 3 times a day? Does it mean that I am able to talk about my story without having a lot of emotional reaction? Does it mean that I'm receiving mental health treatment? So really just got to explore what recovery meant for people who weren't necessarily on the substance use side of things, that there's a clear, I haven't used a drink or drug since XYZ time. But in mental health, it's not necessarily as clear-cut for everyone. Being able to say that I'm in recovery and this is what that means to me was a really empowering thing. And it took probably 2 years for me to really explore what that meant as a result of that conversation. And so I can't say that, I'm in mental health recovery because I don't have depression or PTSD anymore, because that's not true. But what is true is that I've learned how to manage some of those symptoms and do a lot of prevention work and maintaining recovery for myself and what that looks like, and working out and reaching out whenever I start to go down that path to connect with other peers. And just say that recovery does change over time. I think as I learn new skills and learn new experiences and hear from others, as you all are sharing on here on the chat box, that it does change over time. And there are different ways to explore recovery. For me, I think peers were a huge part of being able to explore what that means, but also taking the time for myself. I'm a person who would spend 14 or 16 hours working every day because I believed in the cause, I believed what I was working for, and I loved what I did. And I had a lot of passion. I knew it made a difference for a lot of people. And I wouldn't take the time for myself at all to sit back and think, what am I doing for my own recovery today? What does that look like? What do I need? And so that's a lesson that I've learned over the last couple of years is how do I make the time in my own life and give myself the space to explore what that recovery looks like for me. And then the ongoing process and support. And so being able to identify what really does help you stay in recovery. So once you know what recovery looks like for you, being able to explore what options there are to help support that process. So is it going to meetings? Is it just picking up the phone and calling one of your peer friends that you know has gone through similar experiences? Is it working out every day or 3 times a week? Is it making sure that you're eating really nutritious, healthy foods, and you take the time to notice how you feel after you eat a certain kind of food versus how you feel when you eat maybe a healthier option of food? So just really taking the time to step back, give yourself space, think about what recovery means to you, and be able to say recovery for me means in one sentence is really important. And so Juan and Justin are going to talk a little bit more about what that recovery messaging means and where you might want to talk about that. But I'm, as always, grateful to be here and really happy to be able to learn from my peers along the way, and so glad that they were willing to open up and share their stories with me so that I could sort of discover what recovery meant for myself. Because that, being able to talk about it and articulate it and have a space to think about it, I think is key to being able to stay in recovery. So I just wanted to pull out a few things that I noticed from the chat box that really resonated with my experience and my journey. And I just saw hope over and over and over again in here that there is hope and that inspiration and that recovery is possible. That I think is why we all are here on this webinar is that hope, and we have found our ways. We have found hope in other stories, and so I resonate with those responses. And that recovery is possible for anyone, one day at a time. And people do have to find their own way to recover. You can't force someone else into it or change conditions for them, and that is, as a family member, that is a version of recovery, is being able to, how I guess, step back enough to help other people have that space to find their own recovery and be able to maintain your own recovery in their process as well, and not give up hope. So I love these comments, and I want to bring up the next chat box. So I believe that we'll be able to look at all of these later. But what I want to switch the conversation to now is what has been most helpful to you in learning to share your story so far. And so our very own awesome Juan Velez Court is going to share a little bit about sharing your story and what's helpful in that and how to do it. So Juan, take it away.
Well, thank you very much for that, Lacey. And you did an excellent job, an awesome job of really showing that recovery is individual. Recovery is relative to your story, to your path, to your culture, and you've talked about making sense of it. But what happens once you're aware of the recovery path that you have? What happens when you want to share your story? So I just want to give a quick background on myself. As you see on screen, I work for a system of care in Puerto Rico. I co-founded a peer-run organization in 2011 for this very reason, because I wanted to share my story, and there was no platform. I am from San Juan, Puerto Rico, which is a part of the U.S., and culturally speaking, in Puerto Rico, we live in a very isolated community when it comes to mental health acceptance, when it comes to recovery acceptance. So talking about all of these things, you're told culturally to keep it to yourself, because that is not what men do. That is not what the adult does. You got to keep it to yourself. And I began my road to recovery when I was 6 to 7 years old, when I was first diagnosed with things including depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder. I developed social phobia. I was kicked out of school. I was out of the school system for over a year. I ended up having 3 suicidal attempts because I was tired. I was tired of being stigmatized, of being signaled, of being labeled as this special kid and having nobody to talk to. My only support system was my mother. So eventually I sought treatment in the United States, in Waukesha, Wisconsin. And upon returning, I was dealt with the task. Sorry, my Adobe Connect has stopped working. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Bob.
Okay. So I was dealt with the task of returning to Puerto Rico, not having a support system, having only my mother as the person that was supporting me directly. I became very frustrated. I became socially isolated. And eventually I became obese. A lot of obstacles kept happening in my path. But eventually I realized that I could get better. I could overcome all of this and that I wouldn't be alone. So how did I start sharing my story? I got creative. I have a bachelor's degree in digital film production, so in 2011 I produced a short film based on my story. I released it on YouTube free of charge because I realized that I can't be the only one. And because I can't go to every school, I got to get creative about the process that I can get to so I can get the word out about my story. Hopefully that way I can motivate other families and other people there. Because my Adobe Connect refreshed, I don't have access to the slides or the webcam. So I don't know if anybody could reinstate that or just move the slide. Technical difficulties, people, that sometimes happen.
I advanced your slide, and we can still hear you.
Thank you. That's why Justin's off. So why did I choose to share my story as I turn on my webcam? So hopefully you can see me. I'm back. So there you see a lovely picture of me. I got to a point where I just did not care about what I looked like physically. I didn't even brush my teeth for well over a year. As a consequence, I still deal with some of those issues today. And once I overcame all of that, you have to first ask yourself, why? Why do you share your story? Something so intimate, something that you're not sure how people are going to react. Well, on screen you see a couple of the different things, which is, number one, I wanted to grow a bigger family. The only person that really supported me was my mother. So my key to wanting to share my story is that I just wanted more people to hug, more people to say good morning to, that I didn't feel alone. I was tired of being scared. I went on multiple television interviews, on newspaper interviews, and I just told myself, if I'm scared and I'm afraid to speak out, there's probably like 500, thousands of people that have the same obstacle. But if I can at least do it, even if it's just one person, somebody is going to speak out to their family or in their school, or to their best friend that may be suffering from depression and is too afraid to get treatment. So those little things motivated me. And I love that all of you mentioned the word hope. The words hope and resiliency, I think, go hand in hand with the topic of recovery, because you go into the system frustrated. You go feeling alone, like you're sometimes worthless if you don't have that self-motivation. So I could know that maybe I'm still not 100%, because you're always in recovery. You're always wanting to get better. But I know I helped somebody just by being able to speak out. And that person, who knows what would have happened if that person never heard my story. And I also wanted to personally demonstrate that I could overcome my challenges, because I think that the best way to face recovery and to deal with it is to break through it. A lot of times you like to put things on the side, to maybe ignore something unless it gets worse. But when you face it face first, eventually you have to overcome it. You have to learn to accept that you may suffer from a relapse. You may suffer from obstacles, but for every 500 negative reasons that there are for something to happen, there's the 1 or 2 positive reasons as to why you should go about doing something. And I wanted to spend quality time with my mother. I became socially isolated. As a matter of fact, I developed a speech impediment for many years because I just didn't talk to people. So I realized, hey, this is also great opportunities for me to learn how to speak and laugh and just spend time with people. So that is why I chose to do to share my story. Every person, and you can either write it in chat boxes or you can make this part of your daily agenda, always asking yourself why. But what do we want? Once we go out there, once we knock on that first door, be it on an institution, wherever it is, we want change, right? We always strive to make the system better than it was the day before. You want to be able to open up some minds. There are misconceptions about the patients, about treatment, about what is a person in recovery, about peer support, peer inclusion. You know, we talk about peer specialists, which I became certified multiple years ago, and by sharing your story, you show resiliency, which I just mentioned. And real talk, you create more smiles, because I think everybody loves a really good story. The same way we watch a movie and we cry at the end because that person ended up getting married and ended up overcoming a lot of obstacles. That's the way I feel about, honestly, your story, Justin, and why you're a big motivation for me, man, because you look at all that, and even in the bad days, to this day, you can look at other stories and go, how can they not smile thinking about that incredible outcome? You develop that resiliency as a result of doing all of that, because when you go into a system, not everybody may welcome you with open arms, but at least you can go, you know, that was step 1, and I took that. You reduce things such as risks and discrimination because you change that perception. In my case, I have a couple of more added barriers, being a minority, not directly in Puerto Rico because all of our population is primarily Puerto Rican, but whenever I travel, there is the barrier of Puerto Rico has internet. Puerto Rico, do you use the U.S. dollar? Are you part of the U.S.? And even down here, it's a matter of how you speak. If you speak too well, some people may look at you differently, how you dress, how you behave, how you interact. And a lot of times when you're able to share your story and you're able to get creative and just laugh and smile, people go, well, didn't you mention you tried to kill yourself? You tried to commit suicide? Yes, but here I am today. Shouldn't I be smiling about that as opposed to being sad about it? And you create a positive impact in your community, because later on somebody else is going to go, you know, I don't even have a mental health problem, but I overcame my diabetes, and I want to talk about that. I overcame my cancer. You know, cancer is an unfortunate thing that's overtaking so many people, and we lose our loved ones all the time. And you don't have to just think about mental health, because I believe, and this is just my opinion, that whenever you can balance it out and have people realize that we all have individual obstacles and stories that we want to share, and we share them not because they're mental health or because they're cancer, or because it is a situation that I overcame, which means you can probably overcome it. You're going to turn some eyes around, and those people that may used to be your enemies can then become your friends. So, this all sounds good and gravy, as you say, right? This sounds incredible, but we know it's not necessarily that easy, because there are some things that you have to consider. So when you share your story, number 1, it is your story, which means nobody can take that away from you, which means that you have to be also aware of your limitations. Because you're on a recurring recovery path, you have to make sure that whatever you share, you feel confident about, that you can dominate, and that you don't get any triggers that can maybe apply some setbacks, especially when you're talking to the person. Like a lot of times, a couple of weeks ago, I spoke to a couple of psychology students, and I mentioned to them, I am about to share something right now, but I am aware that me sharing it is going to become a trigger, and I may start to do some things physically, which is blinking, etc., but I am aware of it. But guess what? I'm not going to do that tomorrow, because I am aware that this is happening right now, and if I don't do this, then somebody else may just hide that. Focus on a holistic approach, as I mentioned earlier. When you go out to share your story, don't have it, and this is my opinion, don't be worried about being specific to your condition. In Puerto Rico, we talk a lot about anxiety and OCD. I remember when I met Youth Move, at one point I looked at Lacey and a couple of people, and I was thinking out loud, do these people suffer from mental illness? Because I wasn't hearing conditions. Because in Puerto Rico, you don't say mental illness. You say, anxiety or OCD or bipolar or depression. So I was like, somebody say something so I know I'm in the right place. So the moment that I realized that's not what's important. We all have something that we got to overcome, and it's a matter of accepting each other. I felt so much better, and I'm glad that things like this are still happening. And then you choose what you want to do with your story. You can make people laugh with your story. You can make people cry with your story. You can leave a positive impact that to this day maybe somebody will even text you saying thank you so much, because you have to be aware of your audience. If you're speaking to a grandmother with a grandchild that already had a suicidal attempt, you know that grandmother has lived through a lot. That grandmother has lived through multiple generations of obstacles, of things that are happening, and you have to be aware of that before you go in. So always be aware of cultural competency, of cultural barriers, and be aware of what you want to come out of that based on, very important, based on the interest of that person, just not your own. And this is a little bit more homework for you. I always like to leave some homework for people. Be inclusive, and then write down any other thing that you can think of as to a reason as to why you want to share your story. Because you always have to learn. If there's one thing that I learned in my recovery path, is that when I was very frustrated, how did all this begin? It began at me sitting down at a Subway, not a sponsor for this. I just sat down at a Subway restaurant, and I had a notebook, and to this day, I have it around here. I wrote like a 10 to 15 page list of all the things that I could not stand, that I hated about myself. And I made a personal promise that I was going to overcome those things. And as a result, I became married. I'm in my own apartment. I do a lot of the things that I never thought I would be able to do. But I can read that list and compare. It's very easy to verbally say things, but as human beings, we tend to forget a lot. But you can put it in some black and white. You remember that, and you go, when you have your worst moment, when you have a relapse or something, you can go back to it as a reference, then come right back to wanting to share your story. So I do know that I do have a poll now that I want to talk to everybody about, and then I'll be honest when I say I don't remember how to get the poll going. But the poll is, what has been most helpful to you in learning to share your story so far? I'm getting a lot of feedback already here, which is that to share boldly, individuals and families are counting on us. Focus on the wellness strategies. That is very good. When you think about recovery, we haven't even brought up like the spiritual aspect, the environmental aspect. I mean, you can talk about recovery for hours, because it's not just one thing, as Lacey mentioned. Talk about character defects. I learn each time I tell my story, and should consistently get better at it. Always practice, even to yourself. Just as a closing thought before I take it over to Justin Luke Riley, share your story to somebody that you know personally that doesn't know about it. And then ask that person, out of everything that I mentioned, what are you most interested about? Because you know your story like nobody else. But that person maybe doesn't know a lot of things that they've then got to learn about. So that is also a great task for you to take home with your friends and families. And it's awesome. Sharing your story is, simply put, awesome. And now I want to bring it over to Mr. Justin Luke Riley, man with the fancy blue shirt, who's going to talk to you a little bit more about all of that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Juan. Thank you, Lacey. You know, I got to say, I think I got the short end of the stick. I have to follow both of you. It's been such an honor to listen to what you shared today and to see you both lead so powerfully nationally and in your local community. So thank you again for everything that you said. And I really appreciate the wisdom. And Juan, I think you should probably work on being more excited. No, I'm just kidding. You're amazing, man. Seriously, that passion. I was thinking about the implications towards my family and my recovery, which I'll get into shortly, is really just, it becomes emotional. I mean, I still carry such a heavy weight of gratitude for many of the things that you brought up. So I'll digress before I cry. I haven't even gotten through a slide yet. But before we get to my slides, I am going to try to eloquently pivot to now sharing a poll. Right, Valerie? Or, oh, look, it just happened. It happened and I didn't even touch anything. We're working with professionals here. So this poll outlines what are you trying to achieve when you tell your story. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about is really maximizing the impact of our stories. As Lacey and Juan said, again, so perfectly eloquently, I think one of the things up front that I think about is really making sure that when I'm telling my story, when I'm maximizing the impact, it's not the impact of how good did I sound or how Facebook famous will I become, but really, am I being clear to give other people hope? And then even more than hope, which is so exponentially important, you'll hear shortly how important hope is to me in my life, is how can we clearly make sure that we are giving key messages to the right people that need the right type of tools. And so what that means simply is if I'm talking to family members, I need to kind of change my story a little bit. I need to make sure that I don't just talk about the very nuanced and important differences for a young person in long-term recovery. I need to make sure that I tie that into the family. And that's something I think particularly for me, I can only share, I guess, my own experience, but that's something that I didn't do very well right away. At first, I got really good at saying, okay, my name is Justin Luke Riley. I'm a young person back when I was actually young. I'm a young person in long-term recovery, and then I would go into my spiel. And then I would forget, though, one of the most challenging experiences I'll share is kind of a, maybe not a failure, but a leadership opportunity or a learning opportunity, as Devin and I often refer to them as, is I shared actually to an entire room of attorney generals. And I don't know if you've spent a lot of time with attorneys generals before, but some of the little remarks that I tend to make or try to, like, I don't know, be not entertaining but engaging or make a little comment about this or, you know, referencing when I was homeless and, well, you know, it wasn't that bad because I like camping. So those things weren't funny to them, and it was actually really awkward. And it wasn't that it wasn't so much inappropriate, it was just I was not adequately prepared because I didn't take the time to actually do my homework before I decided to share my story. That really what that opportunity could have been is really being very clear around an opportunity we had to share my recovery story and talk about local policy issues or national policy issues or things happening in communities that were barriers for people to get into long-term recovery. And they would have been far more interested in potential solutions around those types of conversation pieces rather than kind of my story. And so that's a learning lesson that you probably hopefully don't have to repeat, is know your audience. And that's one of the first ways that you can maximize the impact of your story. But to give you a little bit of background and take a quick step back is obviously I'm Justin Luke Riley. I'm the president and CEO of Young People in Recovery. Huge shout out. I know we have a lot of members, supporters, chapter leaders, board members, founders on the call today and video webinar. But I could not express my gratitude to our board members, our amazing staff, and especially all of our volunteers all around the country. The organization would not exist without people repeatedly empowering other people to share their stories. And that's actually an observation that I saw from the last poll. Almost, I don't know, more than half of those responses included how this positively impacts others. And there's a difference, especially I think in leadership empowerment, from elevating your own position of leadership, though being rewarded for your leadership is always a good thing, but doing that on behalf of others and on behalf of those who can't yet speak up for themselves, which I can certainly relate to. Believe it or not, I used to be really quiet, extremely shy, usually just looked down and barely spoke, particularly in my early recovery, because I was just so ashamed. And so I challenge each of you, though very few people from what I can tell on this call need to be reminded that we're doing this for others, but that's something that I just saw was very evident from others. So a little bit more about me and my recovery journey. So as I said, I'm a young-ish. I'm now 29 years old. And so I guess maybe I'm a young person in long-term recovery or just a person in long-term recovery now. For me, that means that I get to be married to the woman of my dreams. Her name is Rachel Marie. I also have an amazing daughter. Her name is Everly Hope. And so that's kind of the proof right there that hope is kind of a big deal for me and my family. And so Everly Hope is about 2 years young, and she loves me. I'm her favorite. Just kidding. But really, we're also getting ready to welcome, my wife is due with a son in May, and that's really exciting. It will be actually right after I finish my executive MBA program, truly 2 days before he is due. So we're hoping that that schedule is just going to stay the way that it should, and we have no surprises. But for me, being able to accomplish not only going back to undergrad, as I dropped out of my undergrad programs twice before actually going to undergrad for the third time, much less than getting into a graduate program and completing the graduate program, those are a few points of my long-term recovery that, honestly, team, I would have never, ever, ever dreamed in a million years that my life would be so fulfilling. And I say fulfilling rather than successful, because I think that can be a slippery slope. But my life today, I wake up every single day, sometimes needing a little bit more espresso on some days than others, but I wake up every single day with a purpose and with a great fulfillment in being a husband and being a dad. And I don't say shyly whatsoever that I am an extraordinary dad. My daughter does not have to worry about how much her daddy loves her, that she is valuable, that she is believed in, that she is smart, that she is strong, she is hardworking, and she is also adorably precious. But those are things that my long-term recovery, far beyond even great accolades like White House award stuff or sharing the stage with some of our country's greatest leaders, that those are neat opportunities. That's the reflection of your work, leaders like Lacey, leaders like Juan. That was a reflection of different people being able to have an opportunity to share those recovery stories and messages of hope. But I'm also a go-to for my family, which is a huge deal. And some of you who are in long-term recovery, and I know that I believe over 40% of the participants on this call are in recovery, that's a huge deal. I am the go-to person when my mom and dad need some help for another family member, that my aunt and uncles are looking to me to provide hope and empowerment and a solution to other family members that need help. And there was not so long ago, I mean, I guess almost a decade ago now, when I entered into long-term recovery, into my 7th treatment program. Prior to that, team, I would not have bet that I was going to be in my parents' life whatsoever. And so that for that to pivot and to now be a go-to person is huge for me, and again, gives me great purpose and meaning in my life. And so a few notes on further maximizing the impact of your stories is on the next slide. And so this is, these are probably 4 to 6, depending on how we want to break them down for those of you looking on the screen. Those of you listening, I've got on the screen here, maximize the impact of our recovery stories. Addiction recovery it's a public health matter conversation. This is something for many of us is not a new conversation. Many of us have had that kind of term in our hip pocket for quite some time. And I'd be remiss not to mention one of my, what will probably be a lifetime memory, was when my parents, my wife, my sister, we all flew down to Atlanta, and I was actually able to sit on the stage with our previous President Obama and heard him say that addiction recovery and mental health recovery is a public health matter, not a moral failing. I'll never forget that moment. And that is a win for everybody on this call. That's a win for everybody in our communities that we work with. And when we look at history, when we look at taking a marginalized public health matter that used to be perceived as a moral failing, or somehow people like myself or Lacey or Juan are weak. I mean, hang out with Juan and Lacey for a little bit, or maybe even myself, you're not, that myth dispels pretty quickly. So I say that to say, this is not just my opinion. This is not something I even came up with. This is something that in public conversations happening all the time, which is a first for me. I mean, I've only been a little recovery advocate for like a decade-ish, and the public health matter conversation is becoming more and more prevalent than ever before. And so I urge you to adopt that language. And if that doesn't make sense to you, feel free to contact us. I mean, one of our last slides is everybody's contact info, and have that discussion, because it can unify communities. It can bring together different resources, and we can really make sure that it's a public health matter conversation, not good people that need to be better, but sick people that need to get well from public health. There's also other cultural implications, and this even ties into the second point on the slide here, team, is that this is a recovery as a lifestyle. I gave an introduction that may be familiar to many, which is, my name is Justin Bradley. I'm a person in long-term recovery. This is what that means to me. But though the qualifiers thereafter about what our lives may look like, or what are the different public health issues that we have battled and become survivors from, it's really something that we have, it's something to say that we have more in common than we do have separately. We honor our differences when we talk about recovery as a lifestyle, but we all have more in common than we do have differently. And that's something for me that ties into those cultural implications, that when we start talking to culture, we start talking to people not even in addiction recovery or mental health recovery, but we're talking about improving communities. We're talking about investing in young people. That's where resiliency and leadership, 2 bullets on the slide here, that's where those 2 pieces come into play. That we're not going to have it. We don't need to focus our time and energy on this drug versus that drug versus this drug or that drug. I understand that those are important conversations, but for the purpose of maximizing the impact of your story, focus on these high points. Focus on the unifying comments. That addiction recovery is a public health matter. There are positive cultural implications when people get into long-term recovery. They become better employees, they become better civic leaders, they become better students, they become better family members, they keep paying their taxes. I'll leave that comment there. But recovery as a lifestyle and embracing resiliency and leadership skills, those are things that are also not unique to people in long-term recovery. Resiliency, critical thinking, problem solving, determination, those are things that I hope and really hope that my daughter also have. That things that young people in long-term recovery or people of any age in recovery are amazing examples of resiliency and leadership development. I hope that my daughter gets to exhibit those same leadership traits as well. And whether she goes through addiction or mental health challenges in order to get to those skills, you know, that's up to the future to hold. But I'm just now going to kind of pivot from those different points to looking at the poll, and thank you all so much for participating in that. You know, gosh, I mean, I see hope all over the responses, bringing hope to others, encourage, empower, inspire. There's help and hope. There's like 17 more hopes, just in case you can't see them. But I think as my closing comments, because I think I'm already 2 minutes over. Thank you, Valerie. That this hope, that these resiliency factors of recovery as a lifestyle, the public health comments, that at the end of the day, some of you have heard me talk about this before, but I think it's something as a takeaway that we can all think about as a long-term motivating factor, that there's some hairs here that we've raised that people may still want to debate, and I encourage that. I encourage critical thinking. I encourage to chew on things and to see where you land and what makes sense to you. But why I do what I do, and my passion and Juan's passion and Lacey's determination, I think I could maybe speak for Lacey because I know she has an adorable little girl as well, that my not-so-secret goal is that more conversations like this happen and maximizing the impact of our stories. I want that true impact to be that when my little girl and my future son grow up, that they're going to be able to talk openly and unashamed about stuff that's happening in their heart or their mind, and they're going to be able to get help because there's no more shame in that. So I'll digress. Thank you so much, everybody. Juan and Lacey, you're rock stars. That was a really tough act to follow. Valerie, you're up.
Well, thank you so much. I'm just really happy that I don't have to follow any of you. I only have to ask questions. Those were amazing presentations, and we're so fortunate to have the three of you with us today. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We also have some really incredible questions rolling in, as well as some very interesting responses coming into the poll question. So let me start with some of the questions that have come in. I'm going to ask our presenters to respond to them. We're also going to see yet another poll come onto the screen while we're doing this, so we have a little more to share in our limited remaining time. So looking at the questions, Ashley asked, how do you share about the spiritual aspects of your recovery when speaking in a public school or government setting? Really good question, and I wonder who would like to take this first. I see Lacey kind of moving her head, so I'm going to say, Lacey, please lead us off.
Sure, yeah. I mean, that's really a part of my journey that I have struggled with a lot, and I think that's going to be the case with, I've heard a lot of people who have similar experience, but we're on a government webinar right now, and we're able to talk about recovery, which is amazing, and we didn't go into, like, specific aspects, but for me, in general, talking about something that can be controversial is, focusing on my experience. And so my experience is this, and not sharing that you should or everyone should, or, staying away from the general statements of thinking a certain way or trying to get people to think a certain way, but just sharing from my experience, and this is what has helped me, and acknowledging that it might be a controversial topic, it might be not the right place for it, and being able to be strategic about that and say, I want to share this because this really had an impact on my recovery. However, I know that that's not the focus of this talk or this, the school or this audience. I think it's okay to acknowledge that. I found a lot of success in just acknowledging that that is something that that can be controversial or is not necessarily a topic, but just sharing from your own experience has been useful, I think. Anyone else?
Yeah, I just want to quickly add to it. I think it's important, from my experience, to immediately embrace the differences that each culture has spiritually, emotionally, etc., and then establish that although we are all different, we all have one purpose, and the purpose is to improve, to focus on why you are here. So once again, if the important thing is to help out a specific student, for example, say you're with a team that wants to support him, everybody can have their own different spiritual perspective, etc. Say, okay, based on all of that, what is the recurring theme within all of that we can come to a conclusion? And if it does get a little bit controversial, always deliver the conversation right back to the focus. The focus is the child, the focus is the person in recovery, because otherwise, as Lacey mentioned, it's a very sensitive topic that can a lot of times close doors if you immediately don't answer a certain way. But having the common ground, that common interest always helps.
Thanks, Juan. Thanks, Lacey. We have another question that has come in that's about family members. How can family members support young people in recovery? And I think that it'd be great to hear actually from all three of you. I wonder, Justin, can you start us off?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Valerie. Great question. So how can family members support people in their loved ones in recovery, correct, Valerie? That was the question?
Yes.
Cool. So I think one of the, I'll speak from my just own experience, I suppose. If my family had not entered their own recovery journey, I wouldn't be here today. And so to break that down, I was not yet on a path towards long-term recovery. I was 17, 18, in and out of a lot of different types of programs, fellowships, treatment, etc., psychiatric wards. I mean, kind of pick an acronym. I had probably frequented it. But fortunately, my mom and dad particularly got that great wisdom that said, okay, well, if Justin is not quite ready or in a spot where his long-term recovery has taken hold and he's on an upward trajectory, you have your own recovery journey to go through, not because there's a substance issue there, but because the substance issue, I mean, to me, one of the, almost like in a very public health way, sick people can make other people sick. I'm not saying that addiction is contagious. I'm just simply saying my unhealthy patterns impacted those around me, my mom, my dad, my sister, even my dogs were crying out loud. And so my parents fortunately worked their own program, had other families support them, and they established and learned about these things. Some of you may have heard of them. Apparently they're called boundaries, and that wasn't really a thing that my family knew about. They knew far more about like enabling and things like that. And so I would say that family members listening, or for those of you that work with family members, with great love and care, because you want to respect that they're going through a difficult time, and you do not want to accidentally put the onus of the addiction or the mental health challenge on the family member. This is about transferring ownership. It's about sharing the responsibility. That the individual, in my case me, I was not ready or in a long-term recovery spot yet, my family still had a responsibility to go through their own journey. And fortunately for them, they got some great tools along the way. And without that, they would have never learned things like boundaries, negotiables, non-negotiables. But their tenacity for them to work a program to help me literally saved my life. So hopefully that made sense.
Thanks, Justin. Lacey, do you want to go next? We'll just work our way down the screen.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I have kind of a different experience because I didn't necessarily have what most people consider, you know, a traditional family when I was going through all my stuff. I was one of those that was really good at hiding what was going on, all the way up through very recently. And so I think part of it is creating a space that person feels safe to open up and actually share what's going on, instead of feeling the need to make it look like everything is okay. So that's from my experience as a person in recovery. From my experience as a family member of people in recovery, I think arming yourself with as much information as you can, learning about everything, learning about processes, and reaching out and asking other family members. I personally, I've gone to Al-Anon and Co-Anon a lot. Those have been really helpful. Getting books, Codependent No More, some of those kind of things have been really helpful for me in my boundary setting and learning how to deal with my family members who are still not in recovery, and I don't think ever care to be. And that's been, a really long journey for myself. Both of my parents are active in addiction still. Out of the 6 oldest siblings, 3 of them were really active in addiction. 2 of them have found recovery. All 6 of us have thought about suicide as an option at some point, and 3 have attempted. So it's really, somebody on the chat said that the family has to get well too. And that's absolutely true. It's, if you're in that environment and that's the culture of your family, somebody's got to be able to break that culture and to show that there can be another option. And so, if you can be that person, or if you can help one of your other family members be that option, and just really the thing that I've seen work over and over and over and over and over again is get them connected with peers who have gone through that experience. Sometimes they need to hear it from somebody that's not their family. I hear that from young people a lot. So and just arm yourself with information and take care of you and set that example as step 1. And then when your young person or your person that is wanting recovery or needs to be in recovery is ready, be there and be patient and help them along that journey. So, but definitely lean on others for peer support.
Thanks, Lacey. Ron?
Yes. To sum it up, I really would not be alive were it not for my mother. She was the only family member that supported me in that path when everybody else was calling child services for negligence. My father took me to court. Everybody else in my family did the very opposite to try to support me. And what my mother showed me, I wrote a little list here because otherwise there would be too many. Number 1 is affection. My mother never stopped showing me love, despite the fact that I would punch her, I would bite her, I would do whatever I could to become the enemy. She never looked at me as the enemy or acted like I was the enemy. She accepted that there was a situation, even though she didn't know what was mental illness or what was my condition initially. She knew, and she knocked down the doors of so many psychologists, so many psychiatrists, and if she felt like something was not right, she would not hesitate to be objective and say, okay, I'm going to get another opinion. She wouldn't blame herself or me. I think a lot of parents, whenever they find out their child has some kind of obstacle, immediately they go, what did I do as a parent? Where did I go wrong? And sometimes things just happen, and regardless of blame or not, blaming doesn't really solve anything. So my mother immediately looked at, I need to learn. She accepted that I had a situation and wanted to learn about it. She traveled. She lost her job in that process, but she traveled to a convention. She traveled everywhere. I mentioned I was hospitalized in Wisconsin. She became an advocate, so immediately after I got better, she developed a support group in 1999 before we even knew there were support groups for people with mental illness or parent support providers or any of that. She was the first one to really do that, and I felt included. Even though I started as a child with everything, I knew what I was going through. I knew that I was traveling for this very reason. It wasn't that she was taking me somewhere and they were making me better. No, this was a place made specifically to help with my treatment. And when I came back, I'm going to this school, which is meant to be helping me with specific things. So she included me in all that process. And to include a topic that they mentioned in the chat, the difference between loving and enabling. I facilitate support groups down here. We deal with that a lot. The difference is that loving means that sometimes you may be temporarily be the enemy in a way because you don't want to enable. In my case, with obsessive compulsive disorder, there are the compulsions and there are the obsessions, and enabling makes it worse because initially, for that moment, everybody may smile, but you're really aggravating the situation in the long term. So loving means making the harsh decisions. Like I did not get along with my mother for many years because of the situation where we had to travel and be hospitalized, but she always told me why everything was happening. She didn't just do it. And eventually it clicked, and afterwards I loved her even more because I was aware of all the sacrifices she made as opposed to other mothers that maybe wouldn't be that resilient in that path.
Thanks, Juan. These are great responses, and the questions are just flowing in, and these are so important. If we're not getting to your question, please note that we will follow up after this event is over. We'll reach out to you over email to see how we can answer the questions that you've raised. I know there's a lot more that people want to talk about and that we want to cover. I think at this point we have space for one more speed round, so I'm going to ask each of our presenters to offer up sort of a two-sentence answer to one of these questions that has come in. How can organizations that are asking young people to share their stories make sure that they are supporting them in doing so in a way that's good for everybody? Juan, can you start us off, and then we'll go Lacey, and then Justin?
Yes. To put it short, share my story doesn't mean that I may need to make a PowerPoint and go to a fancy office. Share my story means that I'm sharing my story in my proper environment, because if you want to include youth or young adults, it has to be an environment adequate for everybody. So don't be afraid to put the computers away, even though the presentations look fancy. Sometimes a good old chair, round table, and some snacks goes a long way, as opposed to having this formal place where you get to share a story, but you don't have that sensitivity. You don't have that one-on-one conversation. So that's the first thing. If you put me on a podium, I will gladly go down there and sit with everybody else, even if you put me back up. Because you want to have that. You want to be personal, and most of all, you want to be you.
Thanks, Juan. Lacey?
Yeah, this is what I've done for my full-time job for years. So strategic sharing training for young people, trauma-informed method of engagement for adults and young people, making sure that if you ask the young people to share their stories, that you support a adult person to come with them that they identify that they're comfortable with, having that level of support. I've experienced a lot of re-traumatization as a result of sharing parts of my story that I wasn't ready for, and I didn't know that that's what it was at the time. But having that supportive adult helped it to be a healing situation and actually a cathartic and therapeutic experience. You know, there's a whole checklist. I'm going to put it in the chat box right now. There's an entire guide from SAMHSA that I was involved with, other advocates were involved with, on developing like youth engagement guidelines for when you ask a young person to share their story. There's, you know, agreements from the young person, agreements from the organization, how to set it up, how to manage questions, how to manage the audience, how to manage press. There is a ton of stuff. I could do a 2-day training on that question, Valerie, but that's my list. And so just check out some of those things I put in the chat box. And yes, and Mario, YPR has awesome stuff, but I'll let JLR talk about that.
Thanks, Juan and Lacey. So 2 sentences. Young People in Recovery offers messaging training on our website and through our chapters. So to learn more, you can apply to be a member of a local chapter to get that training, or even apply to be your own chapter leader, and those young people can actually receive the leadership development and training to learn how to share their story. That's it.
Thanks, Justin. And I hate to rush everybody. This has been just great, but it is time for us to wrap up. We are so glad that so many of you could come today. I would like to remind you that a link to a satisfaction survey will pop up when you leave this online meeting room. We'd be really grateful for you to share your feedback in that form. And then if you have any additional questions, you can also add them into the satisfaction survey and we'll respond to you. Lastly, I'd like to offer one more piece of encouragement to please consider reaching out to request